The boutique's glass doors swung open, and she stepped inside. The clack of her heels against the polished marble floor was sharp, precise. She walked with effortless grace, her tailored coat draping over her shoulders, her presence commanding without a single word. The scent of expensive leather and designer perfume filled the air, and around her, wealthy customers browsed the luxury handbags and jewelry on display. But the salesman at the counter had already decided she didn't belong here. He barely glanced at the other shoppers, dressed in flashy designer brands, but the moment he saw her, a black woman in an elegant but understated outfit, her curls framing her poised expression, his lips curled into a smirk. He stepped forward, blocking her path. "I think you're in the wrong store." His voice dripped with fake politeness, the kind laced with quiet condescension. He thought he was putting her in her place, but what he didn't know, the store he worked for, the brand he thought he was protecting, belonged to her. Have you ever seen someone completely underestimate the wrong person? Share your story in the comments. By the end of this story, one salesman's arrogance will cost him everything. The luxury boutique gleamed with wealth. Shelves lined with designer handbags, delicate jewelry displayed under glass cases, and racks filled with expensive coats and dresses. The air smelled of leather, high-end perfume, and exclusivity. It was the kind of store where only a select few felt truly welcome. The black woman stood tall, poised, as she took in the boutique. She didn't rush. She moved with quiet confidence, her sharp eyes scanning the latest collection with the kind of knowledge only an expert would have. But to the salesman watching her from behind the counter, she was nothing more than an intruder. He straightened his tie, narrowing his eyes as he watched her fingers graze the fabric of an elegant coat. He could tell from years of experience which customers were worth his time. And this woman, she wasn't. Her coat was too simple, her jewelry too subtle, her face unfamiliar in the circles he catered to. She wasn't the type of woman who spent thousands in places like this. And so, he decided for her. She wasn't welcome here. He stepped forward, his shoes tapping sharply against the floor as he blocked her path. "I think you're in the wrong store," he said, his tone smooth but laced with quiet arrogance. Her hand paused over a handbag she had been admiring. Slowly, she turned to look at him. "Oh?" Her voice was calm, unreadable. The salesman gave a practiced smirk. He had done this before, steering out customers who didn't fit the image of the brand. "Yes," he continued, gesturing toward the entrance. "We specialize in luxury fashion here. I'm sure there are other stores that might be more in your price range." He expected embarrassment. He expected her to stammer, to fumble for an excuse, to turn and leave. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him. For the first time, he felt uneasy. The boutique buzzed with quiet chatter, the soft murmur of wealthy customers browsing through racks of luxury clothing. But near the center of the store, a silence settled between the salesman and the black woman he had just dismissed. Her expression remained unreadable, calm. But the salesman, he mistook her silence for hesitation, for weakness. His smirk widened. "These handbags start at $10,000, he continued, his voice laced with condescension. "Are you sure you can afford to be browsing here?" From the corner of the store, another sales associate shifted uncomfortably. A few customers glanced over, sensing tension, but no one said a word. They had seen this before. The woman exhaled slowly, as if giving him one last chance. "And what makes you think I can't afford it?" The salesman chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. "Look, I'm just trying to save you some time. There's a discount store a few blocks away. Maybe try there." He expected her to walk away. He expected her to mumble an apology, to shrink under his gaze. Instead, She smiled. It wasn't forced. It wasn't angry. It was the kind of smile that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked, her voice impossibly calm. Something about her tone made his stomach tighten, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. He crossed his arms. "Oh, I'm very sure." A few customers whispered amongst themselves, sensing something was off. A woman near the register pulled out her phone, pretending to text but subtly recording. The sales associate standing by the jewelry counter? She looked horrified, her mouth slightly open as if she wanted to intervene, but knew better than to cross her co-worker. The tension in the boutique was thick, but the salesman, he was still clueless, and in less than a minute, his entire world would come crashing down. The boutique's atmosphere shifted. The once lively, elegant showroom now felt stifling, suffocating, not for everyone, but for one man in particular. The salesman's smirk had vanished, replaced by something else entirely. Shock, disbelief, and slowly, fear. His hands tensed at his sides, his once confident stance now rigid, as if his body had just realized what his brain refused to accept. The black woman he had just insulted, mocked, humiliated, and dismissed wasn't just another customer. She was Victoria Reynolds, the CEO, the founder, the woman who built the very brand he was supposed to represent, and he had just told her she didn't belong in her own store. The world around him seemed to slow. The whispers of customers, some in shock, some in amusement, barely registered. His mind scrambled for a way out, but there wasn't one, because the email on her phone screen was undeniable. The official company logo, the bold signature, and the most important detail of all, her name, Victoria Reynolds, the name he should have recognized, the name that was probably printed on every single corporate memo he had ignored. His chest tightened painfully. He had ruined himself. The boutique's store manager, who had been watching the exchange from a distance, now stood frozen, his face pale. He took a shaky step forward, but one sharp glance from Victoria made him stop. The other employees? Wide-eyed, exchanging nervous glances, mentally preparing themselves for the fallout. And then there were the customers. Some were whispering behind their hands, others pretending to browse while sneaking glances, and a few had their phones out, discreetly recording, because this was a once-in-a-lifetime downfall, and they weren't about to miss it. The salesman finally forced his mouth to work. I didn't know," he croaked, his voice hoarse. "Miss Reynolds, if I had known—" Her expression didn't change. "But you didn't." She cut him off smoothly, her tone sharp as glass. "You made a decision about me before I even spoke." His face burned with shame, because she was right. And now, he had to live with it. Victoria turned slightly, gesturing toward the boutique's security cameras. "I assume you have surveillance footage?" she asked the manager. The man nodded quickly, his throat bobbing. Yes, Ms. Reynolds, everything is recorded." Victoria's smile returned, but this time it wasn't warm. "Good. I want this entire incident reviewed, a full report. I expect it on my desk by the end of the day." The salesman felt the room tilt. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. This wasn't just a mistake. It was an investigation, and it would cost him everything. Please," he blurted suddenly, his hands trembling as he took an unsteady step forward. His voice, so smooth, so smug just moments ago, was now weak, desperate. "It was just a misunderstanding," he insisted, his confidence shattered. I thought I was protecting the brand's reputation." The moment the words left his mouth, he knew he had made it worse. Victoria tilted her head slightly, amusement flickering in her eyes. Protecting it, she repeated, arching an eyebrow. She took a slow step toward him. Tell me, how exactly does turning away a customer protect my brand? He had no answer. Or maybe, she continued, you weren't protecting the brand at all. Maybe you were just protecting your own bias. His throat went dry. Because that was the truth. And there was nothing he could say to undo it. The store manager, finally gathering the courage to speak, cleared his throat. Miss Reynolds, would you like me to— Yes, Victoria said without hesitation, her gaze never leaving the salesman's pale face. Effective immediately, he's terminated. Make sure he's escorted out. A gasp rippled through the store. The salesman staggered back. His entire body went numb. He had known, deep down, that this was coming, but hearing it out loud, it was like having the ground ripped out from beneath him. A security guard, who had been stationed near the door, stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The salesman turned wildly, looking for someone, anyone, who might defend him. But his co-workers? They just stared at the floor. The customers? Some were hiding amused smiles. Others watched with satisfaction, their arms crossed, nodding to themselves, because justice had finally come. The salesman tried one last time. Miss Reynolds, please, he begged, his voice breaking. This job, I need this job. Victoria's expression remained unreadable. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to humiliate him further, because his own actions had done that for him. And I needed respect, she said simply. But you couldn't give me that. So why should I give you this? The security guard firmly gripped the salesman's arm. He had no choice but to stumble forward, his entire world collapsing in real time. And as he was dragged past the very people he had looked down on, he realized something. For the first time in his life, he was powerless. The boutique remained silent long after the security guard escorted the disgraced salesman out. The heavy doors swung shut behind him, a final punctuation to his downfall. For the first time that evening, the store belonged to Victoria Reynolds, and this time, everyone knew it. The remaining sales associates stood motionless, unsure of what to do. Some of them shifted awkwardly, eyes darting between each other, clearly wondering if they would be next. The store manager, visibly shaken, finally cleared his throat. Miss Reynolds, I sincerely apologize on behalf of our staff. This is not a reflection of our values. Victoria studied him for a moment. Then what is? She asked. The manager swallowed, because that was a question he wasn't prepared to answer. Nearby, a young black girl, no older than 10, stood beside her mother, her wide eyes glued to Victoria. She had seen everything, from the way the salesman had dismissed her, to the way she had stood her ground, never once raising her voice, never once shrinking away. Her small fingers gripped the hem of her mother's coat. "Mommy, she's the boss," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Her mother nodded proudly. And the girl? She smiled. Because for the first time, she saw herself in someone powerful, and that was worth more than anything. Victoria glanced at the sales associates, at the manager, at the customers who had all watched this unfold. She could see the discomfort in some of their eyes, the realization settling in, because deep down, this wasn't just about one man. It was about a system, a mindset, and that needed to change. She turned back to the manager, her voice even but firm. Moving forward, I want this store to undergo full retraining, and I expect to see new policies implemented immediately. The manager nodded quickly. Of course, Miss Reynolds. We'll make sure this never happens again. She nodded once, turning toward the exit. But just as she reached the doors, she stopped, turned, and met the young girl's eyes. She smiled. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't just about today. It was about changing the future. Victoria stood outside the boutique, inhaling deeply, letting the cool night air clear the weight pressing on her chest. The tension of the confrontation inside lingered, but something deeper stirred within her, a quiet, resolute fire. She had fought too hard, sacrificed too much, and built something too valuable to let people like him taint it. Because what happened in that store wasn't just about one salesman. It was about a system of assumptions, a culture of silent exclusions, and the dangerous lie that some people, no matter how successful, would always have to prove they belonged, even inside the very spaces they created. The boutique's glass reflected the glow of city lights, but in its sleek surface, Victoria saw more than just her own face. She saw every individual who had ever been told they weren't enough. Every person who had been sized up and dismissed before they even spoke. She saw the young girl inside the store, eyes full of admiration. And she saw herself, a younger version of herself, before the success, before the business empire, before the wealth. A girl who once walked into stores like this, who felt the quiet sting of being watched too closely, judged too quickly. A girl who once promised herself, "One day, I won't just belong in these spaces. I'll own them." And now, here she was, not just belonging, building, and making sure no one ever felt invisible under her name. Behind her, through the boutique's large glass windows, she could see the staff still whispering, customers exchanging glances, reality sinking in. Some looked ashamed, embarrassed that they had stood by. Others, they looked changed. Because when someone as powerful as Victoria Reynolds stood her ground and demanded better, it forced people to wake up. She had no doubt that after tonight, things in this boutique would be different. No longer a place that silently allowed prejudice to thrive. No longer a place where a black woman had to justify her presence, because now the owner had spoken. And after today, there were no more excuses. Victoria pulled out her phone and scrolled through her emails. She clicked on a draft she had been working on, a message to every boutique manager, every executive, every employee under her brand. A company-wide policy change, effective immediately. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing the final words. Luxury isn't just about the product. It's about the experience. And no one, under my name, will ever be treated as less than. Change starts now. She hit send. A single message, a single decision, and the beginning of something much bigger. Just as she slipped her phone back into her bag, she heard the boutique doors open behind her. A voice, soft, hesitant. "Excuse me." She turned to see the young black girl from inside, holding her mother's hand. The little girl looked up at her with wide, awestruck eyes. "Are you really the boss?" Victoria smiled, crouching slightly so they were at eye level. "I am." The girl bit her lip, then blurted out, "I want to be like you when I grow up." Victoria felt something tighten in her chest. She had spent years fighting for her place in an industry that tried to keep her out. And now, she wasn't just paving the way, she was leaving the door open for others. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small, sleek business card, and handed it to the girl. "Keep this," she said, "and remember, you don't just have to belong in these places. You can build them, too." The girl's face lit up, and Victoria knew this moment mattered, because today wasn't just about proving a salesman wrong, it was about changing a future. As she turned and walked away, she felt lighter, because the best revenge was never about tearing people down, it was about lifting people up. And tonight, she had done both. Victoria walked away with her head high, her steps steady. She had done more than expose a man's arrogance. She had reminded an entire room and an entire company what true leadership looks like. Because real power isn't about controlling who gets to be in the room. It's about making sure the room is open for everyone. Tonight wasn't just about a racist salesman getting what he deserved. It was about sending a message that echoes beyond one store, one incident. A message that says no one should ever be made to feel like they don't belong. No one should have to prove their worth just to be treated with respect. And most importantly, the people you look down on today may be the ones signing your paycheck tomorrow. The store would change after tonight. Policies would be rewritten. Employees would think twice before judging a customer. And that little girl who looked up to her, she would remember this moment for the rest of her life. She would grow up knowing that she didn't just have to exist in spaces like this. She could own them. That's how change happens. Not just through punishment, but through inspiration. What would you have done in this situation? Have you ever seen someone completely underestimate the wrong person? Tell us your story in the comments. If you believe that respect should be given to everyone, no matter their race, background, or appearance, hit that like button and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of justice, respect, and standing up for what's right. Because sometimes one moment changes everything. See you in the next video.